Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to the Technion Data Pipeline webinar series. We're very pleased to have you today, and we have a very special guest with us today from Matillion. Just some webinar hygiene. No doubt as we go through the webinar, you're probably going to have questions or comments. There is a question and answer window within the Zoom webinar functionality. So please put your questions there because then they can be answered for everybody. And also there's a chat window if you want to put comments there as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's just introduce you to the data pipeline webinar series we've been having. We had one earlier this month, which was looking at data quality and data wellness. This was automated data testing. And if you look on the Technion website, you'll be able to see a recording of that webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at Matillion, and we're very excited to be able to showcase this technology for you. Next month, we're going to be looking at Data Vault and what that means and how Data Vault automation can happen with a product called Warescape. In June, we're going to be looking at Snowflake as a cloud technology. We'll actually cover something perhaps about Snowflake today, but we'll go deep dive into Snowflake in June. In August, we're going to look more about strategy and how cloud strategy and what does that mean from a data pipeline perspective. And then we'll have another strategy session later in September. So look out for invites to these, and we're very, very pleased to have you join us. So a quick thing on who is Technion, the company. So we're a full service data solutions consulting firm, founded in '98. So we've been around quite a while, based out of Texas. And we have touch over 400 clients, mainly in the data space. And we have about 65 consultants working for us. We have four main practices, and these are around data pipeline, which is what this webinar series is about. This is basically how do we get data from our source systems into our analytic platforms? How do we transform it, model it, and prepare it for end user consumption? Data visualization is about end user consumption. How do end users acquire the data out of our analytic systems? Data science, a very exciting practice we have, which is moving on from saying we have data which tells us about what happened yesterday, what can we forecast about tomorrow? So very strong data science practice. And we also have a data governance practice, which is becoming increasingly important, particularly in regulated industries. So how do we know what's going on with our data and how can we prove that? Industry recognition, we have, as you can see there, we have strong partnerships with key technologies that we think bring value to each of our four practices. Matillion, from a pipeline point of view, Alteryx, which is about desktop blending, Tableau, which is in the visualization space, and Snowflake as a cloud platform. Now today we're going to be looking at Matillion. I'm very, very pleased to have Karey Graham here from Matillion, who's going to present. And this is part of our partnership with Matillion, where we're supporting the Matillion bringing the software, and we're very pleased to be able to bring services to support people with implementation. So Karey, I'll let you introduce yourself, and let's see what you have to show us.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. As mentioned, my name is Karey Graham. I work within Matillion as a partner technical success manager. I'm really excited for you to have taken time out of your schedule so that you'll be able to see exactly how this tool will work and some of the different features and functionality contained within. So Matillion is an international cloud company whose products are purpose-built for migrating data to the cloud and transforming data within the cloud. We're hosted in one of three major cloud providers, being AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And our Matillion ETL product that we will be showing off today is purpose-built for the cloud data warehouses, Redshift, Snowflake, BigQuery, and later this year we will be introducing Matillion ETL for Azure Synapse. Matillion brings value to their customers in the following four ways that you see there on your screen. Simplicity in that we have a easy to use drag and drop interface that's really agnostic of technical skills. We typically say that SQL makes somebody a power user and that they can understand what they're doing within Matillion and how it translates into the syntax of the cloud data warehouse that they're working within. But in essence, it's entirely code optional. Within speed and scale, our ETL products utilize the resources of that respective warehouse. So for example, as Snowflake is fast and scalable, so is Matillion. And the value is to increase productivity during the development process and really shorten that time to value. In that spirit, the product is easy to purchase and easy to spin up so that no time is wasted negotiating contracts and purchasing equipment. Rather, hourly pricing enables Matillion users to only pay for the time that Matillion ETL is used. There is no long-term contracts and you pay for what you use. So let's take a minute to talk about the modern data analytics ecosystem. The left side hasn't really changed. There will continue to be a broad variety of constantly changing data sources that businesses will need to access. On the right side are powerful BI, analytic, and data science solutions. The middle would normally represent legacy solutions. You'd have on-prem data warehousing solutions involving individuals with a specialized set of skills who needs to maintain their solution on a 24/7 basis to ensure availability of the data for the rest of the team. Not to mention, in order to ensure viability of the system, these skills need to be maintained and would require updating as the technologies change. So goes the need for these specialists to preserve the architecture, so does the cost. Storage is coupled with processing, meaning in order to store more data, one needs to increase the processing power of the hardware in order to handle the extra volume of data. More nodes would be required, thus a direct relationship is formed between the amount of storage and the amount of juice to process that data. What's different in the middle is the inclusion of players from the cloud data warehouse environment. Analytics need to be enabled, but how can we do it in a smarter, more scalable fashion that is inclusive of data sets as opposed to only relying on those who can address the tech on hand? That's where the enablement of cloud data warehouses coupled with the capabilities of Matillion come into play. By utilizing the format of push-down architecture using a code optional interface, you are now able to leverage the architecture of a solution whose security and maintenance won't require a specialized set of skills. Rather than an investment into a solution which an organization has to adopt as a whole, that organization can now scale up the use of their solution at their own pace and leverage cloud economics, being that they only pay for what they use. As a result, there's a much shorter time span from concept to execution. So moving the data from the sources onto the left into the cloud data warehouse, and most importantly, in the format that it needs to be in, is what enables the right side. Getting this middle piece right is where businesses will gain advantage over others and begin to unlock insights. So before we jump into exactly what Matillion ETL is able to add to your organization, I would like to touch upon Matillion Data Loader. So this is a relatively new product which Matillion has developed and released to the public. And this is a great way of allowing customers who are at the jumping off point into the cloud data warehouse realm, they can become acquainted with the web-based low-risk Matillion Data Loader. So this is completely cost-free. A user, all they need is an email and a password, and they'll be able to log into the environment. And within it, they can set up as many data pipelines from a wide array of sources into a cloud data warehouse environment of their choosing, at whatever frequency that these loads should take place. And it's a very simple interface. It's just like the Matillion ETL product. This is really meant for a wide array of skills in order to have that jumping off point from, for example, an on-prem solution into a cloud data warehouse. So on your own time, I invite you to check it out and to see how easy the tool is to use. All right. So we'll go through a couple case studies and then we'll be navigating through the environment. The first I would like to touch upon is DocuSign. And so the problem that DocuSign was experiencing was that they had developed a strong BI infrastructure and robust set of analytic solutions that they relied on for data-driven decisions. But as they continued to grow, it became clear that this infrastructure wasn't going to keep pace with the demands of the business. And they needed to modernize to allow for better performance, scalability, and flexibility. So they decided to incorporate Snowflake as its cloud data warehouse provider and Matillion ETL to 1, facilitate DocuSign's transition to the cloud, 2, aggregate various data sources, and 3, create dimensional models needed for downstream consumption by other business intelligence and analytics tools and teams. As a result, they reduced the time required for long-running jobs from over 22 hours to just 6 hours. The entire infrastructure was running in Matillion within 2 days, and the entire data engineering team was using Matillion as a power user in those 14 days. All right, so I will also like to touch upon Duo. And so Duo similarly had scalability problems in that they were growing too quickly and being able to keep up with their financial reporting requirements. With no growth slowdown in sight, they needed a scalable solution for financial reporting that could be implemented very quickly. So something that they could jump into and immediately see execution in their business functions. A new ERP or revenue tool would have taken too long to implement and were costly. So as a solution, they moved their financial reporting infrastructure to the cloud with the help of Snowflake as well as Matillion ETL. So Snowflake was already offered, Snowflake already offered the needed scalability, and Matillion ETL took pressure off the finance team by handling the transformation needed to get financial data into cleaner reporting structure. As a result, they cut their financial closure process down from 5 to 6 days to now minutes. And the increased ARR reporting frequency was able to, sorry everyone, they were now able to serve teams across the org with near real-time financial reporting, and they achieved data democratization. So now that you've been able to see the solution in action, let's go ahead and jump into the environment and see exactly how to use Matillion ETL. All right. So we will begin on the join project screen. One moment, everybody. I'm having a little bit of an issue with my Zoom here. All right. So upon entering a Matillion environment, a user has the ability to join an already existing project, or they have the ability to create a new project of their own. So as you can see here, I have a single project which is already in existence, being Partner Connect. Now, we typically tell users that as a best use case scenario in being able to utilize Matillion is that this is a great way to divide up teams as well as development efforts to ensure that data is not being corrupted. So for example, you have teams that are within a QA and dev capacity who are building pipelines within Matillion. You will utilize projects in order to separate these two groups out to ensure that the QA team isn't working with dev and the other way around. So I will navigate through to my default project and I will click OK to join the project. From there, my interface is still blank. I need to join a job in order to be able to begin building it out. But as you can see here, this within my Project Explorer has now been populated with a Tech Workshops folder. So within this interface, a user is able to define the hierarchy or define the division of teams within a project in order to really define what makes sense within the team. So I have a single folder for Tech Workshops, and within Tech Workshops, I have 2 already existing jobs. So Matillion incorporates what are called orchestration and transformation jobs. This blue icon indicates an orchestration job and the green indicates a transformation job. So we will go into each job and explain in detail exactly what these are. But to take a step back and to really see how Matillion affects that ELT architecture, Whenever you are working within an orchestration job, you are handling that extract and load aspect of your of that ELT acronym. So we will be working within components, which are the tools in your tool belt, in order to extract data from many different sources and then load them into the cloud data warehouse that we're working within. So the product that we have here today is our Matillion ETL for Snowflake. So as we're working with the components, and especially at the very beginning of our orchestration job, you will see exactly how the effects that we make in Matillion will affect our Snowflake environment in real time. So we won't go too in depth into Snowflake. This may be your first time ever taking a look at Matillion and Snowflake, but I do want to touch upon that because it's very important as far as how Matillion is operating. So as mentioned, we will be working within components to build out our jobs. And as we define the components and exactly how they are to work, we will be able to define those parameters and be able to validate the arguments here in the properties pane. And Matillion is in a constant validation state. So as we are defining those arguments and setting those parameters, you'll see new tasks pop up, which are telling us whether or not our job is valid or not. Similarly, as we run jobs and components, you can see the status and exactly how they are running, and you'll be able to see detailed information once the job is complete. Down here in environments is how one would be able to connect to their Snowflake environment. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So the edit environment is exactly like how you set up a new environment connection, so you're not missing out on anything. But a user is able to define the name for their connection. So typically what we tell users is that name something that makes sense to you. Name something that makes sense to your organization to understand that this is the Snowflake environment that we are pointing to. We also have the ability to upload credentials for AWS, GCP, and Azure. And in order to provide that connection to my Snowflake environment, I only need 3 pieces of information, being my account. So if you take a look at the Snowflake URL, it's everything leading up to the Snowflake computing piece within the URL. And then I will also need a username and password to log into that Snowflake environment. It's important to note that the only roles that are available to the user that we are uploading here are those that are defined in Snowflake. So we'll quickly see exactly how to set these roles, but just keep in mind that we are relaying users as they exist in Snowflake. Also within Matillion, we have a password manager feature in which a user is able to upload information for a password and be able to save it in a secure fashion. So if I go into the feature and I try to edit or try to see details of an already existing password, the only thing I'm able to see or edit is the actual description of the password. So not only is this secure, but this is a layer of convenience, in that anytime I want to set up a new connection to Snowflake or whatever that environment may be, I don't have to go sifting through emails or maybe paper if I've written down my password there, but rather it is housed within Matillion in an encrypted fashion. All right, so now that we have an environment set up, we're connected to Snowflake, I'm going to go ahead and open up an already existing job. However, I also have the ability to, within my project, to add an orchestration or transformation job or create a folder. And we'll get to this export and import button a little bit further down the line, but I'm going to go into my orchestration job. All right, so right off the bat, this is a completed workflow, which is going to extract data from S3 buckets and then load it into Snowflake. We can see right off the bat that within components, this has been populated with the many different tools that I can utilize in order to build out my orchestration job. And it's broken out by category. So at the very top, I can see those components which I'm able to incorporate into AWS. Within load and unload, I can see a detailed list of the third-party services that Matillion is able to connect to extract data from source in its raw state and to load into Snowflake. But I also have a list of generic components. So for example, if my process utilizes a specialized RESTful API, I will be able to utilize the API query to pass OAuth and pass the source and be very explicit with the data that I'm interested in extracting so that I will be able to incorporate it into my process. Similarly, we have a database query component in which a user is able to upload JDBC driver information. So if you have a specific version of a specific platform that your process would incorporate, that can all be included within the database query. So we pride ourselves on having the majority, if not all, data sources that are able to be covered. That being said, if there is a third-party service, oh, and I didn't even touch upon those. So for example, social networks, we have Facebook query, Instagram, Snapchat, and then within finance, here's a list of similar third-party services that we're able to bring into our process. But if there is a third-party service that you think would be a great addition to Matillion, we are always updating and adding new components to this stack that you see here. So please keep us informed of something that you would like to see, because we can incorporate that into future releases. Another note on the components, which is a differentiator between legacy tools, is that every component that you see here for not only the orchestrations, but the transformations as well, is available out of the box from day one. So as mentioned, Matillion is billed on an hourly rate. From there should be no more expense from the perspective of Matillion. As far as data connectors, you have everything available from day one, and you are able to build your job as it will exist. So we have a 14-day trial as well. Again, the components are all available there. Okay. So what we will do is we will take a look at this example workflow, and I'll be hitting upon several features as we walk through the process. So as mentioned, our orchestration handles the E and the L of ELT, but the other purpose that an orchestration holds is we're able to bake in a business process into a Matillion job. So as we can see here, we have many divergent paths that lead from this original, or this first component, which is an alter warehouse component. So we're able to define the dependencies and be able to define exactly the order of events that need to take place as we navigate through the job. So if I begin with this alter warehouse, I can see that there are 3 connectors that are all highlighted in green. This is a way of Matillion being able to bake in error handling into the product. So as you can see, I have clicked the alter warehouse component. I have 3 little dots out to the side, at which I can see at the top, I am able to define a connector in the event of a success. So as you can see, these create table components will only take place in the event that the alter warehouse is successful, but I can also create a path in the event of a failure. Or if that isn't exactly important to my process, I also have an unconditional component, connector, which I can draw to the next component in the process. So within this alter warehouse component, what this is able to do is really work within that Snowflake environment in order to define certain properties within that environment to ensure that it is working the way I need it to in order to fulfill my process. So for example, a very common use case of this alter warehouse component is to alter the warehouse size of Snowflake. So when we're talking about warehouse size, we're talking about the compute layer of our Snowflake environment. This compute layer will vastly affect how quickly jobs are being able to be processed. It modifies the number of nodes that are working within the job. So therefore, it will be very important to ensure that if we want a quick, efficient process, that this is set to the size that we need it to. So if I take a look at my warehouse environment as it currently exists, I'm working within the compute warehouse within Snowflake, and is currently set as size of extra small. Once I run this component within Matillion, as I can see here in this tasks pane that the run was successful as denoted by the green check mark. and I also have a success message and the duration of time that the operation took, I can navigate back into Snowflake and I can see in real time that it has been updated to a size of large. All right, so, and this is a great example of the push down architecture that Matillion utilizes in its relationship with Snowflake. So the best way to think about Matillion is that it is a layer on top of Snowflake in which we are pushing down commands in the syntax that Snowflake will understand. So in this case, we are pushing down SQL that is native to Snowflake and can be read by Snowflake in order to understand what we are requesting in the form of a command. So not only within these properties am I able to see exactly what the arguments are that I'm defining within the component, I'm also able to see explicitly what the command is in the language of Snowflake or whatever the other cloud data warehouse is that I am working within. All right. So within our flow, I've sized up my warehouse to an applicable size that I will be able to perform work very quickly. From there, I'm interested in the creation of tables within my Snowflake environment. So just to take a step back, what we're doing here is we are taking a look at flight pattern data from the 1990s and 1980s. Within the transformation, we are going to be performing aggregations on this data so that we get insights as to the number of flights between an origin and destination between those two decades. And we'll see, excuse me, we will see what this looks like. But the first step that I need in order to be able to ensure this process can be undergone is to house the raw data from the 1980s and 1990s. So let's say that I've gone and created these components and I need to define some of the arguments within. Here we can be able to define exactly what the behavior is within that table to create or replace that table. We're also able to define exactly what the parameters of the columns are. So we can see the names of our columns and data type and size and precision, so on and so forth. And this is a great way of being able to go line by line in order to detail exactly what these tables will look like. However, we can also incorporate a text mode enablement in order to upload a tab delimited list in order to format into this, this matrix so that we're not having to go line by line. All right, so we've gone ahead and we've created our table. So as you can see, we're housing raw information for those flights. We're also housing an airport's piece of data. And then we are also creating a table for the aggregations that we will do within the transformations. Within our S3 component, our load S3 component, what we're doing here is we are extracting data in a raw format from our S3 bucket. And we're able to define using a regular expression exactly how specific or how generic the criteria is in which we are extracting those files. So I can see here that I'm picking up all files that begin with a 198. And I've also specified down here that we have a CSV file type that we wish to pick up. I'm also able to specify certain transformations of the data as it's being loaded. So we can see here within the skip header field, I've specified a value of 1, which defines that for every file which gets uploaded, we are skipping the header, which will likely contain header information, as well as we are transforming every value within this file to null in the event that it has an NA value. Really quick, I want to highlight the help tab. Because there are lots of fields which I'm able to define within this S3 load component. And I don't know exactly what these properties are that I'm able to define. So I can navigate to help and I can see a description of my component as well as a table which specifies each of those properties, excuse me, and how I'm able to set the value and what the effect is on that component. All right, so I'm loading data from the 1980s and 1990s. This will look very similar to up here. The load airport data is a little bit different, however, in which I am loading an Avro file. So this is semi-structured data that you typically find within S3 processes. But the important thing here is that it is JSON formatted. So we not only are able to load tabular formatted data from a source into Snowflake, but we can also do it with the semi-structured data being JSON in this case. So between the loading of data and then the creation of the flight aggregations table, I have 4 concurrent threads that are currently being undergone within my orchestration job. Being an orchestrator of jobs, I have placed an AND component in order to illustrate the fact that all 4 of these threads need to be completed prior to the transformation aspect. So I need to load my data and ensure that the tables have been loaded or have been created correctly prior to the transformations. Also, we can see here at the very end of my job that I wish to size down my warehouse. So in the operations that we are undergoing, we are expending Snowflake credits. And in order to ensure that those Snowflake credits are not being wastefully, not being expended wastefully, I have the ability to not only size up my warehouse, but I can build in the sizing down no matter what takes place over the course of my job. So here we have error handling, in which I'm able to define within my transformation job that if it does fail, I can roll back those changes, as well as generate an SNS message that will be present to me in my AWS environment. I'm saying that either the failure or success can take place. In any event, I wish to size down my warehouse back to extra small. All right. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with credit expenditure within Snowflake, you can see here within this warehouse's screen, you can see how the warehouse size affects how many credits are expended per hour. All right, so we're going to leave the warehouse size to be large, and we're going to jump into our orchestration job. Okay, so as soon as we have clicked into our transformation job, we can see that there are 2 stark differences in the UI. For beginners, the number of components in which I'm able to incorporate, or rather the category of components, has shortened up. I have the ability to read data from a database object as it exists in Snowflake. I have the ability to join 2 of those different objects as they exist in Snowflake. I'm able to leverage the many different types of functions within Snowflake in order to transform my data in a format in which I'm able to extract insights and be able to gain understanding of what my data set is trying to tell me. And I also have the ability to write the data into a new database object within Snowflake. And we can see many different types of ways that we can do that, such as creating a view, rewriting a table, and so on and so forth. The other difference in UI that I would like to cover is the sample tab. So as we are working within components, we are able to generate a sample of data, a preview of the data, the effects that will be undergone as a result of our component. And this will be rendered in a table format within our sample tab. One thing I would like to keep in mind that I don't think I have touched upon yet is, and again, with the Matillion relationship with Snowflake, is that we are simply pushing down commands and then generating a preview of data from Snowflake. Matillion never actually holds data in memory. So it's not like we're importing data from Snowflake into a server, performing transformations, and then moving it back to Snowflake. But rather we are incorporating the architecture of Snowflake, so the security features contained within are all baked into the process. And what we will be seeing within the sample tab is our transform directly from Snowflake. All right. So at the very beginning, we are going to load the data from Snowflake. And then from there, we are interested in qualifying the data by adding a decades column. So if I go into the calculations, I'm able to pull up a window in which I have at my fingertips a wide array of Snowflake functions that I can build into an expression. So in this case, I'm creating a new column for decades in which I'm using a nested if statement to say that any value within the year field, if it's within the range of 1980 to 1989, then I am adding the value of 1980 within the decades column, and I'm doing the same thing within the 90s. However, if maybe the if, or the if double if is not the right function that I want to incorporate into my process. If I was interested in several different types of ifs that I wish to incorporate, I can use if as a search term within this function screen, and I'm able to pull up the many functions within Snowflake that I can incorporate. So if I take a look at null if, I can see the syntax in order to write out a null if, and I also have a link to the official documentation within Snowflake. So we're trying to be very transparent here and really helping users empower themselves in order to understand how to utilize Snowflake functions within Matillion. So upon incorporating my decades column, I will generate a sample of the data. So I can see here that all data that I have pulled up is for the year 1992. If I scroll all the way to the right, I can see my newly created decades column, which renders a value of 1990. And that's great, but this is just a small sample of that data, which is 1992. What if I'm interested in sampling the data that's from 1987, for example? We can see here in this filter, I'm able to click the pencil, and I'm able to see the fields in which I'm able to perform a filter on. So I will select year and set that equal to 1987. I'll click OK and resample my data. And now I can see the sample only includes that which is 1987 data. As we can see here, I also have a row count, which I'm able to generate. So we can see that for all of my data in my data set, that is 64 million rows, only 1.3 million rows of it is 1987 data. All right, so very similarly to orchestrations, I can create different paths that are taking place concurrently in order to ensure that the transformations are being done appropriately. So what I'm doing here is I'm separating out my 1980s and 1990s data, and I'm using that by using a filter component which acts on my decades column. So going back to something I said very early in the presentation, which is that if you are a SQL user, that typically means that you are a power user right off the bat. So as I'm using this filter component, this is most likely me detailing the where component of a SQL statement. So you can probably imagine how this is written out in SQL for those of you who have SQL experience, but I'm saying that decades is equal to 1980. And these can all be selected within drop-downs. So I can be able to be very explicit with what I'm trying to communicate with my filter. As we can see here in the SQL tab, that this is exactly how the SQL statement is being defined. All right, from there, I am aggregating the data. So as mentioned, what we're doing here is getting a count of the data. So flights between an origin and destination over the course of the 1980s and 1990s, as well as the average time of flight. From there, we want to ensure that that origin and destination is captured within the same within a single column, and then we are going to join the data together in order to provide a comparison. So as we can see here, again, being a SQL user makes you a power user. The way that we join data is very similar to how we structure a join within a SQL statement. So in sampling the data, I can show you exactly what we are working with now. So only using a few components, I'm able to transform a 64 million row data set down into, let's see here, I believe it's 3,000 rows, in which I'm able to see that between Phoenix and Las Vegas, that I have 115,000 flights that took place in the 1990s, as opposed to the 21,000 flights, close to 22, that took place in the 1980s. And I'm also able to provide that comparison for the average time of flight. From there, I still have origin and destination fields. By the time I'm done with my data set, I want to be very explicit in what the airport codes are trying to translate, or excuse me, are trying to communicate. And I'm going to join the airport data to translate these airport codes into the actual names of airports. So as mentioned, our airport information is contained in JSON format, in which you can see for every row, we have a key value pair of airport, Thigpen, city, Bay Springs, and so on and so forth. And we can utilize a flattened variant component in order to extract our data into a tabular format. So a single component can take that JSON format and be able to extract it into a format in which we're able to join to our aggregations. So I will utilize two more joins to join together my data in providing that transformation from an airport code to the actual name of an airport. So I can see with very specific clarity that SFO means San Francisco International, PDX means Portland International, and from there, my data set is about complete. I will add two more columns to be very explicit in the comparison between the count and the average times of flight. So as we can see here, we have 11,000 more flights over the course of the 90s. And on average, it took 7 minutes longer, about 7 minutes longer when you're talking about Chicago O'Hare and Oakland International Airport, I believe the name of the airport is. From there, we will load our data back into Snowflake, and conceivably in our business process, we are going to pass it on to a BI or analytics team. All right, so that is our job in a nutshell. I know I just flew through a bunch of different components and what we're trying to do, but in order to leave time for questions, I do want to hit upon a few more features that are able to be incorporated into Matillion jobs. At the very top, I would like to talk about scheduling. So, we of course probably don't want to have users touching this environment in order to be able to run a job. That being said, we have 3 different ways of being able to incorporate scheduling so that we can automatically run jobs and not have to be as hands-on with this environment. The first way is that if we go up to this project tab, we are able to go to manage schedules. And by clicking this plus sign button, I am able to see the very detailed, granular way that I'm able to define the schedule of my whichever jobs I wish to run. So I can specify a name, I can say the hour, the minute, the time zone, and I can specify which job and environment I wish to work in. We also have the ability to set up an SQS queue, in which we can utilize Lambda functions in order to define that, for example, the presence of a file within a SQ or within an S3 bucket will then kick off a process within Matillion. So I have this manage SQS configuration in which I'm able to define various AWS parameters. And I also have the ability to include this as a component within my orchestration job. Now, the third way that many customers have utilized Matillion and kicking off jobs automatically is through the use of the Matillion API, which we have documentation for, and you can see explicitly how this is done. But again, this is another way of being able to kick off Matillion processes without having to be hands-on. We also have the ability to include variabilization. So if I right-click, I'm able to define the different variables that can be included in a job. And I can also define within my project variables. So whereas I can define variables within a job, those variables can be passed to another job. So within this manage job variable screen, we can see that I have set the flights 1980s variable to the value of flights raw. And especially with how people wish for these variables to be dynamic, we allow for iterabilization. We allow to iterate over certain rows in order to define these variables. I've already touched upon error handling. So we're able to, again, define the different ways in which we can specify within the job how to define the action in the event of a failure or success. Again, this rollback, what this does is it cancels out the work that was done in the component which was prior. So in this case, if there were any failures within my transformation job, it would nullify all of those transformations which did take place. Something that developers especially really enjoy to incorporate is to include the documentation which is able to be generated within a Matillion job. The way this can be done is I can right click a job and I can hit, where is it? This may be, I may be in the wrong environment. One moment so that I can be able to spin this up and show you exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, one thing that we typically find is that developers, they don't want to be able to go through the process of explaining their thought process and building out a job. So Matillion has accounted for that by allowing users to be able to generate documentation within a job itself. So I'm going to take you to another environment. For whatever reason, within this was spun up off of Partner Connect, so it does not include the documentation, but I can see here that I'm able to generate job documentation, download it, and I have an HTML file which is generated, and I can see explicitly, step by step through my job, exactly which arguments are being defined, and there's lots of nice little pictures to show you exactly what we are talking about so that we can incorporate not just text, but visualizations as well. Also within Matillion, we allow for certain job life cycle functionality. So we do have a Git integration, which we're able to access a repository and push and pull and ensure that we can save certain versions of jobs in case we might want to call upon it later. Also mentioned in relation to that job life cycle is that we are able to incorporate it into the API. And also, I was touching upon this earlier, but within my default menu that I right click, I have the ability to export or import jobs. So if I chose to export this job and incorporate it into a new project, I can be able to define that and download it onto my local machine in the JSON format, and then be able to import that file into my job. So again, it's a best practice to keep jobs separate, and you can do that by defining projects. But if you do want to share certain resources, that capability is available to you as well. So we don't want to make this completely code, restrictive. If you have users who wish to incorporate a SQL script, they have the ability to be able to do so and being able to write that out in the syntax, in this case, in the Snowflake SQL syntax. Similarly, we have a Python component in which we are able to achieve many of the different pieces of functionality, download packages, and be able to incorporate that into our process. And the last point that I will touch upon before we go into questions is that we do incorporate the concept of data lineage within Matillion, in which you can't quite see it here, but we do have within this metadata tab, the ability to see a drop down of each of these fields and see exactly how the field came to be, how it is in its current state. So you can see exactly which components touched upon the field in order to be able to achieve a certain level of data lineage. Okay, so I know that I just talked your ears off as far as what Matillion is able to do. Now I'm interested in turning the the microphone able to you, or for you to start typing in some Q&A so that I can see what you are interested in. So I see here in chat that we have a question around SQS. So yeah, That's a great question. I don't know what the SQS acronym is actually pertaining to. So it is a simple queue service.
Yeah. Thanks, Karey. That was a really useful look through. So yeah, I encourage you, if you've got questions, poke them on the question and answer channel, and we'd love to answer those now for everybody, or we can feel free. You've got my contact details there, and I'd love to talk to you further. If you think Matillion would be a good fit for what you're trying to do, particularly if you're thinking about cloud strategy, Matillion's a great way, a relatively low cost way to get started into your cloud data warehouse, to do your transformation, to get data loaded, to prepare for end users to consume. So we will be posting out a recording of the webinar. It's also going to go up on the Technion website, and you have my contact details there. So whichever way, we'd love to hear from you, and any feedback as well for Karey. We have a question here, Karey, that's come in. Can we create a reusable mapping with Matillion, a particular mapping used in multiple places with different input?
Yes, and I think a great way of being able to incorporate that is to export and import jobs. And what you will do is just simply switch out where we had that S3 load component, whatever that source may be. So for example, rather than using an S3 load component, we need to extract data from Facebook. We can be able to drag that Facebook component on and simply switch it out.
Excellent. Well, in the absence of any further questions, sorry, we have a question here. Can we use Matillion to create pipelines to work on various Azure services instead of ADF?
Yes. So the product that we took a look at here today is Matillion ETL for Snowflake on AWS. And we have several different tweaks to that so that we can incorporate Azure, so we can load data from blob storage, but that will be done in that separate product.
Okay, we have one other question there. How does one learn SQL? There's lots of really good online resources for that as well. If SQL is not your strength, but you'd still like to use Matillion within your world, as you saw, Karey showed you, you can do it reasonably well. And of course, we've got the Technion team to back you up if you do want some assistance working that through. Okay, in the absence of any other questions, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope this was informative for you. We certainly enjoyed having Karey with us. So we'll bring the webinar to a close, and you'll get a follow-up email with the recording as well if you need to share it with colleagues and other interested parties. So thank you all.
Yep, and to echo Michael's sentiment, thank you very much for taking the time today to get to know us a little bit better as well.